Television. I'm Steve Lance, and coming up, outside of the U.S. Capitol today, honoring thousands of brave Chinese citizens who risked their lives to take a stand with freedom. The white paper protest movement showing that the CCP's grip on the Chinese people could be waning. And President Biden taking aim at Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. What's prompting this fresh wave of political attacks? And what a new Gallup poll is suggesting about Biden's 2024 campaign. Taking a stand against the Chinese Communist Party may not be as easy as it sounds inside of China. Nevertheless, thousands have done so. And today, these voices are being reinforced outside of China at the United States Capitol. NTD's Melina Wisecup joins us from Congress, where that event just took place moments ago. So, Melina, what did folks have to say about this freedom movement, and remind us how it all got started?
Well, what we just saw from that event that took place right outside of the Capitol just moments ago was that, there's a group of Chinese human rights activists and Chinese dissidents who are trying to remind the world that the Chinese Communist Party's stronghold on its people may not be as strong as it seems. And we see that not only with the fact that they're still continuing to commemorate this white paper movement, but also with the white paper movement itself. Now, going back to where this started, this white paper movement started around this time last year when there was tens of thousands of Chinese people, mainly young Chinese people, who stood outside in the streets holding up pieces of white paper in protest of not only the zero COVID lockdowns that they experienced, but also just calling for an end to the dictatorship itself. Now, we heard from some people at the event, and they were just expressing how it's important to stand in solidarity with all of those people who were actually in that white paper movement, considering they have faced backlash by the Chinese Communist Party, but they also expressed the importance of standing with those bold people and encourage them to keep this freedom movement going. Take a look.
What that would take to risk your life in a regime like that, to speak on behalf of truth and protest tyranny, I think that should give us all who are lucky enough to live in the free world some courage to do whatever we can to protect the freedoms we have.
Year after year, more and more Chinese people are standing up to demand their basic human rights. Year after year, the change is happening.
And Chairman Mike Gallagher, he's the chairman of the Select China Committee here in Congress. Of course, he's very vocal on all things China. He actually took it upon himself to, in his speech at this event, list all of the names of the people who were actually still currently detained in China for simply taking to the streets and holding up a blank piece of paper. I also got a chance to catch up with some lawmakers about this white paper movement and the significance of it. Here's what they had to say.
So it's actually a little glimmer of hope that still that China's stronghold on its people is not as strong as they think it is.
And encourage them to continue with that for the cause of freedom around the world, is to acknowledge their sacrifice and applaud their sacrifice. And I think it's important to continue to do that. And this has to happen organically within the country.
So there you have it, Steve. Lawmakers really trying to keep this movement alive even after the zero COVID policy is now behind us. However, there are still billions of people in China who are facing this repression every day under the Chinese Communist Party.
So, Melina, on that note, there now appears to be this new or undiagnosed respiratory illness spreading across China. What are you hearing from lawmakers about their concerns over this, considering that the CCP's cover-up of COVID-19 initially led to millions of deaths and lockdowns worldwide?
Yeah, Steve. So we did speak with some lawmakers who are sitting on the subcommittee on health on the Energy and Commerce Committee today about this. And they said that their big issue here is, of course, transparency. Like you just mentioned, the fact that the Chinese Communist Party covered up the CCP virus, that's what caused millions of deaths around the world. So this is really their number one concern. Many of the lawmakers said they can't trust anything coming out of China. Now, the CDC, for their part, says that they are in contact with the health officials in China about this. And from the lawmakers we heard from, they're also trying to talk with the CDC. Not sure exactly what concerns they're raising. I would assume that they're talking with them more about transparency and just the urgency of it, of making that conversation at the forefront before things get worse, if they, or before, it spreads around the world and it impacts people here in the United States. One of the lawmakers also told me that there's actually a letter in the works to the CDC right now. He wouldn't go into detail exactly about what this is, but I would assume it revolves around transparency and the need for the CDC and the Biden administration to stand up and require transparency from the Chinese Communist Party about this new unknown diagnosed pneumonia. Steve.
NTD's Melina Wisecup reporting for us live from the Capitol. Melina, thank you. So what does the white paper movement tell us about the CCP's grip on power? How vulnerable is the world's largest communist regime? Joining us now to discuss the silent protest heard around the world, we have Bradley Thayer, Director of China Policy at the Center for Security Policy. Bradley Thayer, thank you so much for joining.
It's my pleasure to join you today.
Bradley, we're 1 year out from the white paper protests which swept across China. Some sort of describe this as a brief moment of defiance, but revolution has to start somewhere. So how significant was this moment actually?
I think it was significant for two major reasons. First, it was significant because, indeed, as you said, it's a protest movement that was widespread and seemed to be, in essence, spontaneous, without leadership of a movement. It was very significant because of that. Its breadth and its depth really showed the disgust that the Chinese people have with the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. And the fact that that has moved into the diaspora to a degree, I think, is a very welcome sign. Secondly, it is sadly equally significant because of the effectiveness of the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance state. They are indeed a surveillance superpower, and their ability to identify individuals involved and move against them to suppress the protest, of course, is lamentable and tragic, of course. But even knowing that individual, even knowing the long arm of the Chinese surveillance state, individuals still protested. So that's a cause of great hope.
Bradley, you highlight a very interesting point, which is the fact that there was no leader for them to target. So how scared do you think this type of movement and the prospect of this type of mass gathering makes the Chinese Communist Party?
It makes the Chinese Communist Party very nervous to see a movement, a spontaneous movement arising from civil society, if you will. They fear Chinese civil society greatly, and so they recognize that that serves as an alternative to the party, to the Chinese Communist Party. It allows people to express themselves independently of avenues permitted by the Chinese Communist Party. So they see it as a great danger, of course, to their rule. But it also allows us to recognize, too, that these movements can occur again in the future, right? One could occur tomorrow. For example, and the West and other groups, people of goodwill, of course, in international politics, are not yet well posed to help these movements and to work to sustain them when they do occur, as inevitably we will have other protests like the blank page protest of last year.
Speaking of things that could happen tomorrow, we're actually tracking, Bradley, right now, I'm sure you've seen it, this kind of new novel, potentially novel pneumonia that's spreading across China. I want to get your thoughts. You know, the United States and the West took one approach, the CCP took another. Both countries locked down at different times. China implementing COVID-0. None of the lockdowns, either approach, really helped the situation. Why do you think lockdowns have proven futile, and what is the answer if and when we encounter such an outbreak?
Well, lockdowns have proven futile because because of the deleterious effect, of course, on them, on an individual's psyche, on the well-being, and the fact that people need to be able to be social, interact with other folks. It also failed because it was an overreaction. We know that COVID spread and certain individuals were vulnerable, but the vast majority of the population was not. So the lockdowns became tyranny, in essence. They became a tyrannical tool to control individuals. So they didn't make sense from an epidemiological point of view, and they didn't make sense in terms of a social point of view. For the CCP, of course, it was natural behavior: control the population, lock them down, and show who's in charge. Sadly, in the United States, we now recognize, I think, increasingly, hopefully increasingly, that it was the wrong path to essentially pursue. If it happens again, of course, I think it will be the American people will show greater reluctance to go along, resistance to going along with any effort by the Biden administration to attempt to lock down the population in the face of whatever these series of viruses and bacterial infections seem to be, particularly targeting pediatrics, right? It's essentially infants and young people that seem to be a particular danger. At least that's what it seems so far.
Bradley Thayer, as always, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
President Biden taking direct aim at Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. He seeks to frame 2024 as a choice between him and MAGA Republicans, though polling continues to show warning signs for President Biden's re-election campaign. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
Traveling to Congresswoman Lauren Boebert's district in Colorado on Wednesday, President Biden touting his clean energy investments there while taking aim at Republicans.
The historic investments we're celebrating today is in Congressman Boebert's district. She's one of the leaders of this extreme mega movement. She, along with every single Republican colleague, voted against the law.
Biden's there to promote his so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which he says is the largest ever U.S. investment in fighting climate change. And as foils in his re-election campaign, the president has been targeting Republican lawmakers who have been trying to block his legislative agenda.
The Speaker, Donald Trump, and the MAGA Republicans here in Congress are committed to protecting their outrageous tax cuts.
And Republicans are firing back. Congressman Boebert says in the statement that families in her district are, quote, being crushed by so-called Bidenomics, adding that Biden's Inflation Reduction Act has, quote, mandated Green New Deal policies that cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. And the latest crossfire here comes amid warning signs for Biden's re-election campaign. A new Gallup poll released on Tuesday shows that just 32% of Americans approve of Biden's handling of the economy. And that's despite President Biden saying,
and inflation is down. We have more work to do.
And the economy is not the only area where the two sides are clashing. House Republicans are eyeing to hold an official vote in coming weeks to authorize their impeachment inquiry into President Biden, which might give them more legal power to demand information. The White House, meanwhile, says the inquiry is lacking constitutional legitimacy. Back to you.
And coming up, is the crisis at the southern border really due to a lack of funding? Former acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf joins us to explore. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis facing off against California Governor Gavin Newsom in a debate that's more than just a clash of states. Is this a preview of a future presidential battle? Stay tuned, that and more when we return.
Organize your freezer. Now keep your freezer fresh and long-lasting. Smart Freezer Container. Thanks, Soyun. The magic of the freezer. Make efficient use of freezer space. Keep the freezer cleaner and more tidy. Easy to store modular system. Resistant from -22 degrees to 212 degrees. For family safety, BPA-free and LDPE material. Different sizes for different applications, depending on the size and use. Use it smartly. Efficient space utilization for cold air circulation. Neatly organized with minimal empty space. Partitions and trays for more efficient storage. Smart Freezer Container.
Thanks to Soyun.
To a child, this is what conflict looks like. Children in Ukraine are caught in the crossfire of war, forced to flee their homes.
A steady stream of refugees has been coming across all day. It's bitterly cold.
Lacking clean water and sanitation, exposed to injury, hunger.
Exhausted and shell-shocked from what they've been through.
Every dollar you give can help bring a meal, a blanket, or simply hope to a child living in conflict. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month. That's just 33 cents a day. We cannot forget the children in places like Syria, born in refugee camps, playing in refugee camps, thinking of the camps as home. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month. Your gift can help children like Ara in Afghanistan, where nearly 20 years of conflict have forced the people into extreme poverty. Weakened and unable to hold herself up, Ara was brought to a Save the Children center where she was diagnosed and treated for severe malnutrition. Every dollar helps. Please call or go online to givenowtosave.org today with your gift of $10 a month, just 33 cents a day. And thanks to special government grants that are available now, every dollar you give can multiply up to 10 times the impact. And when you use your credit card, you'll receive this special Save the Children tote bag to show you won't forget the children who are living their lives in conflict. Every war is a war against children. Please, give now.
Welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. Congress showing skepticism over the Biden administration's request for additional funding at the southern border. Is the border crisis simply a money issue? Joining us now to assess, we have former Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. Secretary Wolf, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming. In light of the recent skepticism, I guess you would say, expressed by Congress regarding the funding for border security, how do you believe policy changes would effectively enhance border control? And what specific legislative actions do you think are necessary to return the border to its prior state?
Well, I think members of Congress have the right amount of skepticism, right? And so the question that the Biden administration is giving Congress is, we need more resources and we need more funding to help manage the crisis. And I think many members of Congress, particularly Republicans in the House, are saying, look, I've been giving you money over the last 3 years, and somehow the crisis continues to get worse and worse and worse. And so just last year, the department received $1.5 billion to help manage this crisis and solve the crisis, and yet month after month, again, it continues to get worse. So there is a right amount of skepticism there. What I have said is there's not a money problem along the southwest border. It's a policy problem. We have the wrong policies in place that are not deterring the illegal behavior that we have there. So I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I would tell the Biden administration, look at what's worked in the past. Obviously during the Trump administration, but even during Obama and even a little bit under Bush, there were some programs and some policies that worked. Almost all of that was torn down during the first several months of this administration, and nothing has really been put in its place. So I would say revisit some policies such as Remain in Mexico. All of those administrations, Trump, Obama, and Bush, built effective border wall systems in priority locations. This administration really has not done that. And so there's a number of other things that they could look at and do. The issue and the problem now is that they are so far underwater along that border, in that, for the past 35 months, they've torn down so many effective programs that it's going to take some dramatic moves and decisions to get this back to a normal state.
Chad, there's a lot of, obviously, turmoil around the world. You have the conflict between Israel and Hamas, the Russia invasion of Ukraine. How do these types of conflicts impact border security and policy and resource allocation? And what are the implications for border security in the context of these international issues?
Well, sure. Anytime you have international incidents or issues going on and elsewhere in the world, you always have to determine how are they going to impact the homeland. And so they do that in a couple of different ways. You can certainly do that from the number of individuals coming into the country. Cyber means there's a number of ways that what's occurring overseas manifests itself in the homeland as it specifically relates to the border. Unfortunately, what we see now, though, is special interest aliens and a whole host of individuals from about 170 different countries showing up along that southwest border because they understand and they know what's going on, that if you come across that border illegally, that probably within 24 to 48 hours, you're released into the United States, and that is their goal. Their goal is to be released into American communities where they can stay pretty much forever, if not for several years before they see an immigration judge. And so unless we change that dynamic and we provide some disincentive for that illegal behavior, you're going to continue to see it continue. And then the threat there, or the risk, I should say, is Hezbollah, Hamas, and other special interest aliens from countries of concern, like Iran, like Iraq, and others coming across that border illegally and being released in the United States.
Chad, lastly, there's been a significant uptick of Chinese migrants at the southern border. How should the U.S. adjust its asylum policies, especially considering the totalitarian nature of the CCP and the need for true asylees to be processed, but yet at the same time, there's obviously a lot of folks that are just kind of gaming the system?
Well, I think you kind of hit it on the head, right? Reforming the asylum system has to be at the heart of whatever we do regarding border security and immigration reform. There's a lot of other things that you can look at, but the asylum system is broken today. And unless you go about fixing it, and really Congress is the only one that can truly fix it, you're going to continue to see this influx of individuals. What we know is whether it's the Chinese nationals or it's other nationalities coming across that border, 85 to 90% of them never qualify for asylum. They know that. The cartels and the smugglers know that. They're not concerned that they don't qualify for it because they know they'll be released into the United States, and many of them don't show up for their court proceedings. So if you want to change the dynamics along that southern border and really start drawing this crisis to an end, you got to reform the asylum system. You got to make the credible fear standard higher, the threshold higher. Otherwise, you're kind of, you're making some improvements around the edges, but you're not really getting to the heart of what's driving the crisis.
Former Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, thank you so much for joining us. A 5-alarm fire that must be extinguished. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer warning today the nation of a dangerous rise in anti-Semitism. This as lawmakers are now investigating allegations of anti-Semitism at America's top universities. NTD's Ariane Pazdar has the story.
I feel compelled to speak because I'm the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in America.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Wednesday addressing the rise in anti-Semitism in the U.S. In the 2 weeks after the attacks by Hamas, the Anti-Defamation League reports an almost 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents over the same period last year. Schumer says he sees a stark contrast in the ways Jewish and non-Jewish people react to that increase.
To us, the Jewish people, the rise of anti-Semitism is a crisis, a 5-alarm fire that must be extinguished.
He says that's because many American Jews have family members who suffered persecution firsthand, and they're now worried that history is repeating itself. The Majority Leader also said anti-Israel protesters often argue that Israel displaced 700,000 Palestinians. But he said those same people never talk about the 600,000 Jews who were displaced from Arab countries. Schumer concluded with 3 appeals to the American people: learn the history of the Jewish people, reject anti-Semitic double standards, and understand why Jews defend Israel. At the same time, lawmakers in the House are investigating Harvard, the MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania. That's over allegations of anti-Semitism on their campuses. Because of that, the presidents of those 3 schools will testify before a House committee at a congressional hearing next week. At the same time, the Department of Education is opening an investigation into Harvard. That's to find out whether Harvard failed to respond to alleged harassment of students based on their national origin. However, the office made clear that it has so far found no evidence of wrongdoing. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
The civic tradition of a televised debate may not be happening next year. The Commission on Presidential Debates has announced the upcoming schedule for the 2024 election, but so far neither Republicans nor Democrats are committing. Here's a look at some contributing factors. In recent years, moderators have begun to actively insert themselves into the debates, taking up more and more speaking time from the candidates, from a 5% average in the 1990s to as much as 25% now, at times showing bias or favoritism toward one side or another. Another possible reason: debate venues. This year, potential debates will be taking place at a string of college campuses where partisan activism is flourishing. But there is one debate that is on, and what's to be expected could be an entertaining political showdown this Thursday evening. Florida Governor and 2024 Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis is setting the stage for a high-stakes debate with his California counterpart, Gavin Newsom, touted as not just a clash of governing philosophies, but also a prelude to a potential presidential rivalry, if not in 2024, then perhaps in the future. While Newsom consistently downplays 2024 presidential ambitions, his rising national profile fueling speculation about his future intentions. Meanwhile, DeSantis, amid a challenging national campaign and a dipping approval rating in Florida, likely sees this as more than a debate, but also a strategic opportunity to position himself against a formidable Democratic figure who's possibly eyeing the White House. It's a chance for both leaders to bolster their standings and rally their bases. For DeSantis, it's a crucial moment to rejuvenate his campaign and make a national impression. For Newsom, it's an opportunity to defend Biden's record and confront Republican policy objectives. And that is all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.